Hello everyone and welcome back to Backlog Banter. My name is Tucker Hazel and this is Dev Dive, talking to interesting developers about their games. Today I am joined by Tom van den Boogaart. We are going to be talking about Grun, his new game that is very normal, and also about gardening. We're here to talk about that. But if you like these videos and you like listening to me talk to devs, you can subscribe and watch more of them because I've got a bunch that I've already done and more coming down the pipeline. But Tom, thank you very much for joining me talk here about your normal gardening game. First, I just want to ask you to give a quick pitch about Sokpop, the Sokpop Collective, which is the group you're a part of. To you, what makes Sokpop special? Because I know there's a lot of people that might not understand why it's sort of different as a development group. What makes Sokpop special to you?
I think what makes us different is that we've put out a lot of small games in a short time. How we used to work or make games is that we are with the four of us, and then we used to make a new game every month. But then we wouldn't make the game with the four of us. We just individually make the game and then release them staggered, pretty much. And I guess people say that our games are quite cute and playful and a bit weird as well. And also that we make the games separately, but still have a lot of things in common in terms of visual style or gameplay, philosophies and stuff.
That constant churn of new ideas, that's something you find invigorating, that, you know, inspires you creatively?
Yeah, I think we also inspire each other because we started out by doing game jams a lot. So the whole Sokpop thing was not there yet, but we just like making games in Game Maker in a short amount of times. And we used to come together and then participate in game jams and make something weird and small. And then we used to play them like together. And that was the whole thing, really. That's where the whole Patreon idea came from, I think.
You've kind of found a way to make just your day-to-day job kind of a game jam, working collectively with the four of you and throwing ideas back and forth and lots of small things. And it is very unique, and that's why I kind of wanted to set the groundwork up top about what your context is as a developer. But what I think makes Grun unique is that it's not the very short, quick idea that a lot of Sokpop's games are. This is a game that is much larger in scope and I think very substantial. And I'm curious for you, when did you start working on this game? How long has it been in development? Because this certainly feels like a bigger project than many of the things you've worked on in the past.
Yeah, for sure. First of all, I would like to say that it's crazy to be able to do this for a living. Like, we started doing the small game jams, and then we started the Patreon because we were thinking of a way to be able to sell those small games, because we didn't really want to make something together but still be able to sell a game. We really embraced that idea of, oh, we can make a lot of cool small games, and then if we bundle them together, they might be worth selling, I guess. So we did that for, I think, 4 years. Like, through Patreon, we released a new game every month. First, it was actually 2 games a month. That's crazy. And then it was 1 game a month, and since 2 years ago, I think, 2022, I think, yeah, the end of that year, we decided to stop doing the monthly releases through Patreon, because we'd made 100 games by then, and I think we all were quite done with that, like, because I would have had a lot of ideas for the Patreon and we'll start making a game, but then I would have to rush it to launch, to release it for the patrons. We were already quite ready for making bigger games that take 1 year or longer, because we're all bound to this 4-month schedule. I think when we stopped doing the monthly releases, I really started thinking about, okay, now I actually have a lot of time to make something bigger.
You've been unshackled.
Yeah, exactly. Because I was rushing a lot of things for the Patreon, and I think I still like the games I made, but yeah, there was also always something more I would like to add to them, or just something slightly different. It just takes time to make a good game, I think.
Yeah, so I like the fact that it has evolved over time. And while you did keep yourselves to a schedule, 2 weeks, then a month, and now you've kind of rejected even that, I like that it evolves. And so, how does Grun fit into how that has evolved over time? You have finally been unshackled. Your project can take as long as you'd like it to. When did you start working on Grun, and did that sort of come out of the idea of that you didn't need to put that sort of time pressure on yourself?
I started working on it early 2023. I think we released Sockfest, which was the 100th game of Sokpop. We made it all together with the four of us. It's an online MMO where all the characters of the other games are also present, and it's not a really good game. You can just walk around and chat with other people. It was a kind of a way to celebrate the whole Patreon and the monthly releases for Sokpop. So then I had a lot of time to think of, okay, what can I make next? And probably spend at least a year on, because that was the kind of scope I was aiming for with a lot of the Patreon games as well, which was not possible. So I had to rush it a lot. And then I think I've always had this idea of making something a bit spooky, because a lot of the Patreon games, or a lot of the Sokpop games even, are quite cute. We've made all kinds of games for the Patreon, like racing games, shooters, but there wasn't really a spooky game. So I was also curious to see what a spooky Sokpop game would look like or play like.
And that playful, colorful style of Grun and the tone that is ultimately something spooky. It is unsettling. There are some jump scare moments, I think, is what makes it really unique in my mind. I've played a lot of horror games. I played a lot of indie horror games that take a more like gritty, dark. They use a lot of shadow. They use a lot of muddy textures and grimy things and like a gross sink. But Grun leaves that behind and does use that visual style that you guys have been known for, and you especially have been known for, of high saturated colors, a little bit of a goofy tone to it. So talk about the way that you developed a horror game with that colorful visual style. Did you find any ways that made you approach a unsettling sort of spooky horror game in a different way? Did it change your visual style in any way to make it a horror game? What was working on that balance like?
First of all, my whole aim was not to make something very gritty. Like I wanted to make it spooky, but not in a very typical way, like very dark and harsh noises, and also because we had all these Patreon games with the Sokpop style. I was just very curious to see what would happen if I would keep that aspect, like the saturation and a lot of the colors, but then still give this dark twist to it. I was also very deep into Twin Peaks, the series. I won't spoil anything for it, but it's, to those who don't know, I guess you could say it's a detective. It has this very almost cozy but eerie vibe to it, and then it becomes very slowly becomes very surreal. So that was definitely an inspiration. Yeah, but I think I just took a lot of inspiration for the visuals from previous games we've made. Like I didn't really want to make something very scary as well. Like you have all these horror games where there's a scary monster and it follows you around and it grabs you and it kills you. That's not really what I like to play as well. I get spooked very easily, so I didn't want to make it too scary for myself. I was more going for this mysterious Twin Peaks inspired vibe.
Yeah, and on the game side, you say you've played a couple other horror games. Are there horror games that you like that like fit your level of how much you like to be scared that might have inspired this game a little bit?
I haven't played that many horror games, I think. I've seen a lot of horror movies, but it's hard to think of good ones, to be honest.
But sometimes that doesn't matter. As a horror fan, who cares?
That's true. Yeah. Yeah, that's true. I've played a bit of this first Silent Hill game. That definitely is an inspiration as well, because I had to look up something like in the games medium, like what's out there already, and I don't want to make something very similar. But definitely the soundtrack is also very inspired by both Twin Peaks and Silent Hill. But I think it's a very different game, of course.
No, definitely. I think what is so interesting about Grun is that it, as you said, mixes a colorful visual style with an unsettling, spooky tone. But the game on a gameplay level and a structure level is also very different. It's a game about mystery. It's a game about discovery. It's a game where you die and have to restart, but you keep a couple of hints. But it's mostly about knowledge. It's about you know what to do, you know where to go, you know that you can get this key in a different order, and that'll unlock an entirely new way to sort of approach the game. And so I don't even know really what genre to say the game is from a gameplay level, but I like that it's sort of a subversion in that way. And so, are there any other games that inspired the direction and structure of Grun? How do you describe this game in terms of its genre? I mean, it's so unique.
First of all, I didn't really know that it would become this game when I started making it. Because the whole idea was to make something Twin Peaks inspired and also inspired by my father's garden. He lives up in the north of the Dutch countryside. I think it's not really that far up north because it's only 2 hours from my place, but I think like in the Netherlands that's a big distance.
In Texas, where I'm from, that would just get you to like the middle of nowhere.
Yeah. Yeah. No, but by visiting my father a lot over the past years, I think that also planted some kind of seed in my brain to do something with that setting because I live in a city and he lives in a small town. He has this big garden and everything grows really fast and he has to tend to the garden a lot. At night it's very dark out there. And it's also a setting that hasn't really been portrayed before in a video game, I think, like a Dutch countryside. And it's also felt very personal, so that I think that was a good choice as well. But the whole idea was just to remake my father's garden, like a digital version of it.
Oh, interesting. So is that first core area sort of modeled after your father's garden?
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, actually, almost the whole world is based on the town that he lives in. I reshuffled some parts, but like the church is also there in the park, and the gas station is also exists, but it's in a different place. So I played a bit with it, of course, but at first the whole idea was to just make the garden, and then you would have to cut the grass, and then it would grow back, and that was the whole game. It doesn't sound really like a fun game to play, but that's where it started, and then organically it grew from there by thinking about, okay, what if you could go out of the garden? Why should you go out of the garden? And I also, of course, wanted to do something mysterious, like put a not really the horror, but I think a mysterious element in there. I did need some story for that to make sense, I guess. Like I would say, oh, it's a gardening game where you cut my father's garden, and then it's also a bit scary, but I didn't know what the scary part was.
Yeah. So how did the structure evolve over time with finding different items and discovering different areas and sort of the time progression and all of that? This game does mix together a bunch of different structural elements that I think do come together very well. But even as I'm playing it, it's a game where there's just this sort of spider web and you can choose your own path. And I imagine that that is either something that was very planned out or just kind of evolved over time because it seems really complex and you find this item in this area and you get sort of a hint from this photograph and you take it all the way to the other side of the map at this certain time of day. I mean, how did you pace that out? How did you design these puzzles? It's just I can't even really fathom it as a player.
Yeah, that's a good question. I think so. When I thought about, okay, it's a gardening game, but then there's also some mystery, like what's going on, and then within Sokpop is that we talk a lot about our ideas and where we would like to go, and often I really don't know where I'm going, so then I discuss it with the others. And I think together we came upon this idea of you're tending to the garden, but then the owner isn't there. So we were thinking, oh, there should be something with the owner of the garden, the house, and that should also be the reason that you go out of the garden. I think that's all I really needed. Some reason for the player to feel the need to go out of the garden and explore the world. Because what I really like to do is make worlds that you can explore and they're filled with secrets and stuff. And so I think that was the core idea. I think when I started piecing some stuff together, so I had the garden and then the church and the park. And I think I just really started with a simple thing like, oh, you only have the shears at the beginning, and then you read about the watering can being in the park, and then the player has this idea of, oh, there should be some way to go to the park, and then that's their goal. So I think because it's really hard now for me to because it's very like you have all these items and it's all interconnected and stuff, and that's just the process of working on it for over a year, I think. It really started with, oh, you need this item and it's at a certain location, and then I want the player to be aware of that without holding their hand too much, and then the game goes from there. Early on, I already had this idea of endings and that there are multiple endings, and then so I had this idea of this orb entity that's the owner of the house, and then whenever you reach an ending, they will send you back to the beginning of the weekend. That enabled me to make a lot of endings that you can find, and then certain items lead to those endings. When you reach an ending, I hope people would have this idea of, oh, I should do something different, and they will explore that by themselves. And I think when I started making that, I realized that the gameplay loop is actually quite similar to the Stanley Parable.
Yep. God, that's one of my favorite games of all time. I've played that game so many times. Oh my gosh.
Yeah, it's so good. So it wasn't really an inspiration from the beginning, but when I started making the game, I realized I could take a lot of ideas from that game. So it also influenced Grun in some way.
Yeah. And you mentioned that a big part of the game is the multiple endings. There are 11 endings in the game total, and most of them come from you just dying in some way, or at least a solid chunk of them do. And so, for you watching other people play this game, what's the most common ending that you find that people get? For me, the ending that I got the most times, this is just me having an embarrassing moment as a gamer, was the drowning one where the water fills up and then you drown, because I didn't know there was a lever on the wall. In all my panic of I have to get out of here, I didn't notice the lever, and so I died like 3 times to that. But that's just me missing something. But in terms of people approaching it from different ways, what's the most common ending that you find people get?
I think one of the endings that I saw people getting a lot is either the mist ending or the darkness ending. So when you stay out too long when it's midnight, you will get the darkness ending. Or a lot of people don't really realize that that ending exists, which is reasonable. And then also the mist ending is on the final day. Then it becomes very Silent Hill, foggy, and then the mist closes in on you. I think those two are the most common ones. Definitely the drowning one after that, I think, because you get put in this situation where you don't know what to do. And actually, first I only had you could only escape the bunker with the hammer by smashing the door. And then I decided to put the lever there, but apparently it's still quite difficult to get out there.
Yeah, well, just because it's a tense moment, and I think what's interesting about playing Grun is you don't know when something is going to be dangerous or not, and things can kind of just come out of nowhere and knock a whole run out of the way. And so I think that's why got the drowning ending. I think that was the first ending I got, and why I was so panicked is because a lot of the game up to that point you can take at your own pace. There's not things chasing after you. There are a couple of jump scares, but they don't hurt you. You can't die from them. And so when I was put into a moment where it was suddenly my reflexes were tested, my knowledge of the area was tested in a more time-based way. My mind went into overdrive, like, oh God, what do I do? What do I do? What do I do? And then apparently it drove me so crazy that I died there like 3 times.
What I didn't want to make is a horror game where there is something that follows you, and then because I think a lot of games do that, horror games, that there's some kind of monster or entity, and they follow you in the world, and then it becomes almost some kind of stealth game, and then you have to be aware of the monster seeing you or not, and then it grabs you, and then you die. I think that's something I wanted to prevent, because I think I wanted to have all endings be connected to something the player does, so it's never really random or unfair, I guess. Even though it feels unfair because you don't know about the ending, but the whole idea is that it's knowledge based and that you're able to quickly regain that progress if you know where to look at.
Yeah, and so you watch a lot of people play this game. I assume you've seen many playthroughs. You were doing play testing. I'm sure your friends at Sokpop were also playing it. Are there any things that you as a developer were surprised to see other people do, habits they sort of formed, orders in which they did things, things they found easily or didn't find easily? What was it like watching other people sort of dig through your game that has a lot of secrets and find their own path through it?
I really started seeing other people play it when I was showcasing the game, like an early version of the game, at the games developer conference in San Francisco. It was right before the demo, so the garden area was there, like the starting area, and then the church area as well, and the park area. And I think a lot of people back then didn't realize that there was more than just the garden. I definitely had to put in a lot of work to make sure people figure out how to get out of the garden, because that's the whole thing, I guess, because you're hired to be a gardener and then you start gardening, and then there's this moment where you think, oh, I need to get out of here, but I'm not allowed to do that, and then it derails from there. But I also didn't want to hint too much at all the things you need to get out of the garden, because then it's really, I think the goal was to make a world that feels quite real and not that doesn't feel like a game level. Like I could have put a lot of stuff there to really guide players to certain points. That's something I wanted to avoid, which is where when I started adding the Polaroids, which really fixed that problem, I think.
Yeah. The game strikes a really interesting balance between having a lot of hints. You talk about the Polaroids, you talk about some of the characters, like they'll sort of hint to things like, hey, they want this item. They are doing this thing that suggests that they will be doing this later down the line or whatever that is. But the game is also full of just totally crazy things that, unless you're like really paying attention, you won't think to like try to put this item here or give this item to this person. And so as you were playtesting it, watching other people go through it and fail or find things easy or too difficult, how did you sort of balance that, not difficulty, but the mystery or the secrets of the game? Because there are some things in this game that I learned about afterward through looking at other people talk about the game or play the game that I'm like, I never would have figured that out. But were there some things that you made easier through the development process or made more obscure? What was that process like?
Yeah, so at some point I was talking, I think, with Aaron from Sokpop, because I had this problem of people getting lost, or like, because it was very obscure, you would have a lot of items in different places, and it was before we had the Polaroids. Back then you would just need to go somewhere yourself and, and then use an item there or find an item. With Aaron, I came to this solution with the Polaroids because it felt like a very smart solution, because it shows you a part of the world that you haven't seen yet. So it should make you curious about what's there without holding your hand too much, because then the whole point is to evoke this kind of exploration feeling. It was quite difficult to find a balance between holding people's hands but also letting them go and then trying to see if they could find it by themselves. But then I really wanted people to get out of the garden, because then I think the game really starts. So with the Polaroids, at some point I decided that, because there's a lot of endings in the game for which you need items, but there's also items that you only need for certain achievements or like secret stuff. Pretty early I decided that the Polaroids were only meant for things that have something to do with the main storyline, because there's one good ending, and I think so all the Polaroids lead to the good ending if you follow them. I think there's no Polaroid that shows something that doesn't have to do with the good ending, but I might be mistaken. I don't know. Like, those are my limits, I guess. Like, if I would make a Polaroid, it would have to do with the main storyline, and then I also wanted a lot of obscure secret stuff, because I know people like to find out everything about the worlds in a game. So then I decided to not make Polaroids for those. You can still finish the game by following the Polaroids, but then if you want to figure out all the achievements, then you can just explore for yourself. That was the solution.
Yeah, for me, I think the thing that appealed to me most about it structurally was the idea of this sort of incremental knowledge progression that we've been talking about through this, that when you find an item, once you learn that you can find something in this way or do something out of order, then you kind of log that away in your mind of, I can approach this from a different angle in the future. And for me, that evoked the same feeling that I get when I play Metroidvania games like Ori and the Blind Forest, which is one of my all-time favorites. Seeing something like, oh, that is something I should keep in mind so that I know I need to come back there in the future once I have more knowledge, have an item, have an ability. I guess it would be like a tool in this game. And also, in terms of the ways that the secrets are hidden and that alternate paths can be found, it reminded me quite a bit of Souls games, of Dark Souls and Bloodborne, and how you can take a secret crazy item and put it on the other side of the map, and that'll unlock this bizarre, surreal area. And we've been talking a lot about how this is based on a real location. You wanted it to feel like you were exploring a believable place, but it certainly breaks that in many areas. There are shortcuts that sort of teleport you through other parts of the world. There are underground passages that don't really make a lot of sense. There are doors that you walk through and you enter an entirely unreal realm. And so when did you sort of break free in the development of this has to be based in a real location? Because there's a lot of places in this game where you go that very clearly are not based on real life.
From the beginning, the idea was to base it on my father's garden. And then you have these non-Euclidean spaces, like you have this door and then it leads to a whole other space than would be possible. But most of those locations are also based on personal stuff. Like you have this boat area where there's two kids sitting and they eat snert, which is Dutch pea soup. That boat is based on a real boat that I would take to an island north of the Netherlands. I guess a lot of those things feel a bit random, maybe. To me, they're all very logical. By mixing all those real locations, I think it starts to feel a bit more surreal because they're not connected in a logical way. But then there's also a lot of weird stuff, like you have this void-like area where it's just a white space with a tree.
When we talk about the secrets of this game, there being a lot of things that are very hidden and kind of difficult to find, kind of obscure. Are there any parts of the game that you think go overlooked in terms of the design of the game? Anything that you wish players were able to find a little bit easier? A secret that you're really proud of that you don't feel like enough people have sort of appreciated or seen?
One of the things I've only heard mentioned once, I think Riggy Haggett mentioned this, is the camera that can be found in the normal toilets after you find the good ending. So because there's all these Polaroids in the world, but there's not really something that justifies them laying around everywhere. And then if you reach the good ending, this is a spoiler, or a slight spoiler, but then all the non-Euclidean spaces are gone, and the toilet is one of them because it's like a small building from the outside, but when you enter it, it's like a deep area with multiple stalls. But then if you find the good ending, that area, like the toilet area, becomes normal again. And then there's also a broken camera there, which the idea is that it was the camera of the previous gardener who made all the Polaroids.
Sure. Okay, yeah. So there is a sense of lore. There is a story here that I think is very hard as a player to sort of piece together because a lot of things do feel so bizarre and unconnected. But you as the developer, I mean, obviously you thought about all these things going in. And so there was even some thought put into why would these things be there, even if they don't have a explanation early on, they might come back around by the end. So there is some sort of sense to it.
Yeah, I think it's important to add small things like that suggest that there's more lore to it than you would think. If we would just make a mysterious game with a lot of random locations and then there's no explanation for what's going on, I think then it would be a bit fake and a bit weird. Whenever I make something like this, I try to put small details here and there. There's also a book you can find that goes more into detail about the demons in the game. But then there's a couple pages that are torn out, and you can actually find those pages somewhere when you enter this strange red world. I also haven't heard anyone finding those. They're there.
Yeah, so it still seems like there's things to find, and there's a community that's probably working to piece it together. As a creator, we've talked a little bit about you watching some other people play it, but what's the experience like on your end watching the community sort of figure out this game? Have you been looking at any message boards? You go on the Sokpop Discord where people are talking about it, watching any playthroughs or reviews or things? What do you like watching other people sort of work through this together?
Yeah, for sure. Because I think I put in a lot of secrets. Like most of them are Steam achievements. So they are small storylines and then they lead ultimately to an achievement. But I put those in so that people can figure out how to get there together. So it's been a lot of fun to read the Steam discussions, for example, and the Discord as well. I think that's the whole reason why I put those in there without like hinting at it too much to see if people would get it. Because I released a demo earlier this year in June. It was already quite big, but within like 1 or 2 days, people just would have found everything that's in the demo. So then like I really knew I could just put a lot of obscure stuff in it as well because people just try to figure it out anyway.
Yeah, and so did a lot of those most obscure stuff sort of come near the end of development as you were just trying to add as much weird things as you could?
Yeah, for sure. I made sure to finish all the normal endings first, and then I decided to just focus on the small details for 2 weeks, and then I just put them all in after each other because I had most of the endings already. So it was trying to fill in the gaps, like areas that didn't really have much going on there. All those obscure stuff, I didn't really think too much about that. I just put them in at locations that were quite
Yeah,
empty.
sure. Yeah, and I think that you succeeded in making there feel like there's not necessarily in many areas that aren't used for things. Everything does feel useful in some way. There is some secret to find in every area, and so I definitely felt like it didn't feel like these were added later. It felt very cohesive, which I think is to your credit
Yeah, okay.
as a designer. But I'm curious for you as someone who has worked across all sorts of scales of game design, and this being one of your bigger projects. Did you find that this sort of scale of a 1.5 2 year development cycle was really satisfying? Do you want to do this again? Do you want to shift back to making smaller games in between larger projects? You don't have to say what your next game is going to be, but do you think that you're going to oscillate or stick with big things or stick with smaller things? What do you feel?
I think I will stick to this 2 year length of projects because I really like to make worlds that you can explore, and it just takes time to make them, and also time to make them feel good, I guess, to fill them with secrets. I think that's what I like to make most, is to put a lot of secrets in a place that you can explore, and then you can talk about it with others that have played it, and you can discuss, oh, did you find this? Did you see this? What do you think this means? It's just very difficult to do that in a couple months, I think. Because with Grun, there were so many moments where, for example, the Polaroids and also the non-Euclidean spaces, especially the non-Euclidean spaces, to make that technically was quite difficult, and it took me, I think, 2 months to have it in the game. But then that opened up a lot of possibilities for me, like, oh, I can put any location, like it would just be, they're all like floating levels pretty much, and then I wouldn't have to think too much about how it's connected to the rest of the world, which is quite difficult when you make an open world game. I think everything needs to make sense, I guess. I mean, probably it doesn't, but I think that's important to me.
Okay, well, I think that we have thoroughly gone through the development and design and history of Grun. Tom, thank you very much for joining me. Of course, shout outs to all your friends at Sokpop, and everyone go check out the games that they make. Go subscribe to their Patreon, where you get games more frequently than most people are putting out games. And also, I believe through the Patreon, each month you get access to one of their older games, one of the 100+ games that they've made that Tom was mentioning earlier. Very cool that you guys are doing this. You mentioned that you're sort of outside of the industry, but I think it gives you a unique flavor, and it sort of keeps you doing your own thing. And I think that's really important for the modern games industry. Again, thank you very much for joining me. We'll see you guys in the future for more Dev Dives.
Thank you for having me, Tucker, on this great episode. I look forward to when it airs. Thanks to all of those who are listening to this episode, and to all of those who played my game Grun or any other game that we've made at Sokpop. I really appreciate all the nice stories I hear about people playing it together and or alone, people that get scared or not. Yeah, thank you.